This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome to the show. Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos joins me. Always look forward to talking to you every Tuesday, Eric, just because there's a lot happening. I never know from week to week what the big news is going to be. First of all, let me ask, how are you doing and what's on your radar screen?
I'm doing pretty well, though. I'm sorry I didn't suit up appropriately for this episode of the Bryan Hyde Show. I was going to put on my banana outfit, but I left it at the No Kings protest.
Oh my goodness! Yes.
What is it all about, by the way? Why are they wearing like vegetable outfits?
Or dinosaurs, or
yeah. What is that all about?
I think it's a distraction from the fact that you have a bunch of ostensible adults protesting and in some cases crying in the streets over things that they don't know. They're hard pressed to answer. When someone sincerely asks them, "What exactly are you protesting?" It's just kind of vague, mumbled. Well, Trump, he's destroying the country, our democracy. Just talking points mishmash.
Yeah. And it's interesting that it seems that probably half to maybe 70% of the people are on the verge of being geriatrics. It's like this cohort of rapidly aging boomers who think it's still 1973 and they're listening to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young protesting the Vietnam War.
And maybe that's a part of it. I mean, Eric, it's hard in today's environment not to allow ourselves to be more enemy driven. I find myself, stuff that makes my blood pressure go up, or I watch a video and I'm like, oh, I can feel the anger just starting to surge. I'm very careful about stuff like that because it took me a while to realize that's one of the easiest ways for us to be manipulated. It's the ring through the nose most people don't even realize is there.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think that for a lot of people in this country, they are now in a state of just constant anxiety and anger. They have been I'm trying to pronounce this correctly. I like to make up these new words. Ideologized to such a degree that they've lost the capacity for any kind of reflective, critical thinking to, look at something and say, well, okay, what's this all about? Do I like this or do I not like this? And why? Do I not like it or like it? Instead, it's Orange Man bad, and again, I'm the last person to carry water for Trump. I have found many things to criticize about what he's been doing, but I can quantify it. I can tell you specifically why I don't like it. And I can also point to things that he's done that I do like. In other words, I'm not blinkered by ideology, and personality. And this is what we're dealing with. And there are a lot of people out there who have kind of, as you say, when we talked about this a little before we got on the air, have kind of slipped past the event horizon of reasonableness. You just can't even discuss anything with them.
Yeah, it's disturbing. And I don't want to come off as superior and, well, I'm so above all of that. But it pains me to see good people, I mean, people that I love, who, when they wake up in the morning, the first thought in their head, Orange Man bad. And then they just feed that all day long. Every bit of news they watch, every person they talk to, it's all just an affirmation of, he's really the worst, isn't he? You hate him too? Come on, let's all go to lunch and we'll hate on him together. It's like a full-time job.
I think you and I, and probably a lot of people in our Gen X demographic, are puzzled and baffled by this because we can remember a different America when most people weren't mentally ill. Most people were capable of taking in a point of view and thinking about it and responding to it on the merits rather than, as you say, just sort of like reflexively screaming Orange Man bad. I mean, it's a caricature, but it's an accurate one. And I don't think it's coincidental that we have been subjected for the past 5 going on 6 years now to a brutal assault of just constant induction of stress and anxiety. Everything from the pandemic to Ukraine, to Israel, to this, to that. It's just a juggernaut of things that are making people lose their minds. And I think a lot of people have lost their minds. And it makes me sad also. And it also worries me because it's dangerous. When you have lots of people out there who are not capable of reason any longer, who have lost their minds, those people, they're literally the loose cannons, to use that term, that can be directed at you and me and anybody else.
And there's no shortage of people who are willing to escalate it to violence. I mean, Idaho is pretty tame in terms of the whole No Kings thing. Yeah, there were protests, but they were pretty well behaved for the most part. But I have some friends from the Idaho Freedom Foundation who they just went out to do man on the street interviews. Now, I'm telling you this, they're not the kind who go out there to troll people and to, get in their face and, basically wave the red hat in their face like they're taunting a bull or something. They sincerely went out there to ask people, I think they had three questions that they wanted to ask of why are you protesting or what's this all about? And almost immediately on them entering this event, they found themselves surrounded by a very, very hostile crowd to the point that the police literally had to form a cordon around them and then escort them out. And it's like, these were not troublemakers. These weren't proud boys, suiting up for a fight or something. They were there to have fun and to observe and to get some video. But the response in return was the threat of violence. And frankly, if the cops hadn't been right there, I'm sure some licks would have been, taken.
Yeah, something that strikes me as interesting while we're talking about it is that as American society has become increasingly secularized, there has been this rise in a kind of religious fervor that isn't religious, because these people, the ones that you're talking about, it's as if they regard anybody who isn't among the brethren, one of them, as a heretic. And it's almost like going back to Europe in the Middle Ages. If you didn't agree with whatever the orthodoxy was as presented by the dominant group, then you were literally in fear for your life. And you had to, hide in your basement to read your Tinsdale Bible, for example, because, if you got caught reading the heresy, you were going to, end up getting burned to death. And that's kind of where we're at in this country now.
Yep. And I don't say this from the standpoint of, look, I'm not trying to get people, hey, we should be really ticked off at people who believe that way. I think they probably deserve a little bit of pity, but mostly I ask people, consider what's going on here from the standpoint of don't be that easily played. Don't
Yeah.
be the kind of person who can be so easily played that they'll abandon their principles or maybe just chase what they think are principles, when it's really personality. And this is, where the shoe is on the other foot. This, by the way, Eric, this is one of the places where I think your credibility to me is pretty dang secure, is you're willing to question. You're not stuck on this binary look. You're either for Trump or you're against him. You're willing to think
Thank you for
outside the
that.
box.
I mean, I know I'm not perfect, but at least I think I'm not crazy. I mean, I'm a little weird. People who know me will tell you that, but at least I don't think I'm a mental patient for just that reason. I think I'm capable of sort of stepping out of my own box and looking at myself and looking at the things that I believe in or that I think are okay, and asking, well, am I right about that? Or, is there reason to maybe change my mind about that? Yeah, it's just an extraordinarily odd circumstance that we find ourselves in. And I think, as we were talking about it, another thing popped into my head, that one of the reasons that we're having this issue in the country and the culture is because of social media. I have found that since I have divorced myself from X, which X communicated me, I don't spend any time doom scrolling through all the stuff that's on X that seems to me to be designed to trigger people, whether you're on the left or the right, whatever, your particular ideological orientation is. You'll get this barrage of stuff, that confirms in your mind, if you let it, that, everything is terrible and the enemy is at the gates and we have to worry about these horrible people on the other side. It's not just that we disagree with them, that, they're Satan's spawn and they have to be stamped out some way. It's very corrosive. And I find that I'm in a much better place and a state of mind since I don't spend hardly any time any longer on X other than to post links to my articles.
No, I think that's sound advice. And the point that people miss too is we have been manipulated as a population. This is not some John Bircher conspiracy about, well, people are pulling strings. This has been well understood for over 100 years, how to manipulate public opinion, how to shift public opinion. And I'm going to even argue in some ways, not all propaganda is bad. Propaganda that persuades me to wear my seatbelt, that persuades me rather than threatens me, I think is actually a pretty cool thing. But propaganda that persuades me, oh no, my government can do things in the dark and without me knowing and without understanding what the costs are involved or what is actually being done in our name. And it's just too complicated for us to understand. So we just have to trust the experts. I think we saw a pretty good lesson 5 years ago of what happens when we trusted the experts, and those experts took advantage, plain and
Yeah.
simple.
They did. You made me have a flashback when you talked about propaganda. I would call it public service. You remember when we were kids and they used to have Schoolhouse Rock on TV?
Oh yeah. Oh
Conjunction
yeah.
junction, what's your function? And those were good. They kind of got kids into learning their ABCs and basic math and things like that in a fun way. I don't have a problem with that. That's enhancing and promoting something that's healthy and good. Like you, my issue comes down to being manipulated and being pushed. That's what I don't like. If, for example, the government were to tell people, the evidence is that if you do X, it will be good for you, and leave it at that, and let the facts speak for themselves, I would not have an issue with that. What I have an issue with is when they just really apply this pressure to people. You have to believe that X is good for you, and not only that, if you disbelieve it, you're a bad person, and we'll make you do it regardless. We'll supersede your judgment, we'll supersede your autonomy as an individual, and we'll compel you to do what we think you should do. That's when I have a problem with it.
I think you may have stumbled onto one of the keys for escaping the matrix, and that is social media is the input, I think, for most of us, to be attached to the matrix, so to speak. So
I think so, and I think it's particularly pernicious, and this is by no means my own observation. I think this is becoming common, that particularly for kids, it's so damaging to kids who are immersed in that and who relate to the world and to other people chiefly through that medium. When you and I were kids, we related directly with other kids and our parents and other people out in the real world. And that's a very different nuanced thing, because you actually have face-to-face time with another human being who's a real person, as opposed to what's probably some bot on a social media thing that's just trying to poke you and egg you on into having a particular point of view.
right. All I know is we have our work cut out for us if we're going to stay sane, if we're going to remain free. And you mentioned, well, maybe I'm kind of a weirdo for this. You almost have to be. You have to be comfortable with not fitting in with society, because the people who fit in, I'm sorry, there's no diplomatic way to say this, but they fit in because they have given up any sense of individuality. Safer to run with the herd. And I don't know. I know, Eric, in reading your writing for many years, you would take the discomfort or the uncertainty that comes with freedom and the ability to chart your own course than the comfortable certitude of knowing that I'm fitting in and nobody thinks anything's wrong with me. And when the whole herd of lemmings is racing for a cliff.
Well, sure, because fundamentally what defines us as individuals, it's autonomy of mind. The sacrosanct idea that I'm going to choose for myself, I'm going to evaluate, and I'm going to weigh pros and cons, and nobody just tells me what to do, and I'm not going to be part of a herd. If you're a part of a herd, you've lost your humanity. You've literally become cattle. You become this just animal that goes wherever. When we were kids, remember they would tell us about the lemmings rushing over the cliff, and
Mhm.
are you gonna do something just because other people want you to do it? And we were instructed that that's a bad idea, that you got to use this thing that you got here in your head that teaches that allows you to do the one thing that animals can't, which is to think. Use your brain. You don't have to be, as they say, a rocket scientist to think. Just use your brain. Don't let others do your thinking for you, because if you do, you've lost something that I think is just absolutely foundational and fundamental to being a human being.
And there's something to be said for finding your place, being comfortable not within the crowd. Um, some people can't imagine that. Oh, what a horrible place to be all alone out there. No, it's pretty peaceful. And most of all, you're calling your own shots. As you mentioned, when you get onto social media, I see this particularly with X. Whatever I linger on for, however long it takes the
Yep.
algorithm to measure it, that's what I see more of.
Yep. Yep.
Plain and simple.
I want to mention something here, because I know hopefully that there are some younger people who are listening to us rattle on. If they haven't seen it, I think you'll probably agree with what I'm going to say. There's a great movie from the 80s, one of those John Hughes movies called The Breakfast Club. And it's about a bunch of high school kids who are caught in after school detention for various sins that they've committed. And each one is sort of an archetype. There's the jock, there's the prom queen, and the various other characters. And what's interesting about it is that these kids have to confront their own ideology. Like they were pigeonholed into their category. The jock hung out with other jocks, and he didn't know these other kids who are sort of in a different category than himself. And they all got to understand that they're all fundamentally humans, and they're interesting to each other, and they don't have to all be the same. And it was a really good movie for that reason. And I wish they'd make more movies like that for kids today to see.
Hear, hear. Eric, we're down to our last couple minutes. Anything automotive that you would like to get on the record for this week?
Well, let's see. The thing that I thought was most interesting developmentally or in terms of recent developments, isn't so much on four wheels, it's on two. Honda is starting to put what they call an e-clutch in some of its motorcycles, meaning a motorcycle without a clutch which to my way of thinking, renders it something other than a motorcycle. Scooters, you get on a scooter and you rotate the grip or whatever and it moves. Motorcycling is all about having a higher level of skill and expectation. And some are going to find fault with me, but what I don't like, I understand why Honda's doing it. They're wanting to attract this younger crowd of people who maybe, are unfamiliar with a manual transmission in a car. So they're really intimidated by a motorcycle, which has a manual transmission also, and they're wanting to draw in new blood. The problem with it is it ends up diminishing what a motorcycle is all about. It's kind of like, you remember in the original Matrix where Neo learns judo by downloading the app? As a guy who loves motorcycles, there is a higher bar, to the skill set. It's not just something that anybody can just get on a bike and do. You have to master some skills, but that's exactly what makes it so satisfying and gratifying. And that once you do that, you have that sense of, wow, I learned how to do that and I'm getting better at that. And then, oh, I'm good at this, as opposed to, anybody can do it. That's just my gripe about it. I don't like it. I think it's a bad move long-term on Honda's part. I understand why they're doing it, but I'm sad about it, just like I'm sad to shift back to four wheels in cars, that manual transmissions are all but extinct now in cars for the same reason, basically.
That's a whole different topic. We'll have to do next time we talk. Let's talk about the disappearance of the manual transmission.
Absolutely.
Just had a conversation with my kids actually this last week, and the joy of popping the clutch and stalling the car on a hill. Oh, well. Eric, great as always to catch up with you. I'll have a link to your website in my show notes. Thanks again for joining us.
Absolutely, Bryan. Thank you.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.